The Galactic Concord Chamber had a word for what happened to Earth in the year 2114. They called it triage. Everyone else called it abandonment. The Krythan Dominion had come out of the dark between stars with 300 warships and no interest in negotiation. Earth had a dozen orbital defense platforms, a scattering of colony ships barely capable of atmospheric flight, and a species that had only just learned to walk among the stars. The Concord Council, the alliance of 11 founding species who govern known space, met for 6 hours, took a vote, and decided that Earth was not yet a full member. Not yet worth the fleet. Not yet worth the fuel. They left humanity to die. All except one. The Ashvari Compact was small. 4 systems, 1 battered defense fleet, a people who had been at war with the Krythan Dominion themselves a generation earlier and lost half their worlds doing it. They had no obligation to Earth. They had barely even met humanity, a handful of trade envoys, a language still being translated word by word. But when the Ashvari ambassador, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Elena Van Tress, stood up in the Concord chamber and heard the vote, she did something no one expected. She walked out of the chamber, went to her ship, and called her home fleet. "We're not going to watch this happen," she told the Compact's ruling council over a channel that took 11 minutes to reach home and 11 minutes to return. "Send everything we have." The Ashvari fleet arrived at Earth 4 days before the Krythan Dominion did. 18 ships. Not enough. Everyone on both sides knew it wasn't enough. They came anyway. The Battle of the Soul Line lasted 6 days. Historians would later call it the bloodiest 6 days in the history of 2 species. The Ashvari ships, faster and better armed than anything Earth had built, threw themselves in front of Krythan cruisers meant for human colonies. An Ashvari captain named Doran Kesh flew his crippled destroyer directly into the path of a Krythan dreadnought bearing down on Earth's last shipyard over Luna, and the concussion of that impact was visible from the surface of the planet as a second, brief sun. Earth held. Barely. Battered, burning, half its orbital infrastructure gone, but it held, because 18 ships from 4 systems away had decided that a species they barely knew was worth dying for. Of the 18 Ashvari ships that came to Earth, 5 went home. The Concord Council, when the dust settled, offered polite condolences and quietly noted in the official record that the Ashvari Compact's unauthorized intervention had been a regrettable escalation. No apology to Earth was ever issued. No medal, no monument, no acknowledgement. But humanity remembered. And humanity does not forget its debts. 109 years later, the United Earth Defense Fleet's 3rd battle group sat in high orbit over a scorched, dying world called Ashvar Prime, and its commanding officer, Fleet Admiral Grace Whitfield, born and raised in Amarillo, Texas, 40 years in service, the last surviving officer to have flown in the Soul Line as a cadet, stared at the tactical display and felt something in her chest that was somewhere between grief and cold, focused fury. "Confirm the reading," she said quietly. "Confirmed, Admiral." That was Captain Ryan Holt, her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man from Toledo, Ohio, whose grandfather had served on one of the orbital platforms during the Soul Line. Krythan Dominion Fleet. 240 vessels. They're finishing what they started a century ago. The Ashvari Compact, having never fully recovered from the losses it took defending Earth, had spent the last century as a shadow of itself. Its 4 systems had become 2. Its fleet, once 18 strong for a single desperate mission, now numbered barely 30 ships total across its entire territory. And the Krythan Dominion, patient, ancient, and possessed of a memory as long as its grudges, had finally come back to collect what it considered an old, unfinished debt of its own. The Concord Council, contacted for aid, had voted. 6 hours of deliberation. The same 6 hours, almost to the minute, as a century before. Not yet a full member. Not yet worth the fleet. Some things in the galaxy, it seemed, never changed. Except this time, someone was listening who remembered exactly what that vote meant. "Signal from Earth Command confirms," said the communications officer, a young lieutenant named Priya Anand who had grown up on stories of the Soul Line the way other children grew up on fairy tales. All available battle groups are inbound. ETA to Ashvar Prime, 11 hours. Admiral Whitfield allowed herself, for one moment, the faintest and grimmest of smiles. 11 hours. It had taken the Ashvari fleet roughly that long, adjusted for the distance, to reach Sol a century ago. The math wasn't lost on her. It wasn't lost on anyone in the fleet who'd grown up hearing what those 18 ships had done. "Get me a channel to the Ashvari Defense Command," she said. "And get me a channel to the Concord Council. I want them both to hear this at the same time." When the two channels opened, it was an old Ashvari defense officer, a survivor of the current siege named Sela Corvath, who answered first, exhausted, half his fleet already lost, static crackling across a signal punched through a battlefield. "Earth Fleet, this is Ashvar Prime Defense Command. He stopped. Recalculated what he was seeing on his own scopes, dozens of Earth warships translating into the system, more still arriving, weapons arrays coming online in formation around what was left of his beleaguered defense line. "Admiral, I don't understand. Your council never authorized." "The Concord Council didn't send us," Whitfield said. "We're not here on their authority. We're here on our own." On the second channel, the Concord Council's liaison, a smooth, unbothered voice that had spent decades adjudicating the affairs of a dozen species without ever once bleeding for any of them, cut in with practiced calm. "Admiral Whitfield, the Council has not sanctioned Earth military action in Ashvari territory. I would remind you that unauthorized." "With respect," Whitfield said, and there was nothing soft left in her voice at all, 109 years ago, this council sat in session for 6 hours and decided my planet wasn't worth saving. 18 ships from a species we'd barely spoken to came anyway. 13 of them didn't go home. My grandfather watched a man named Doran Kesh fly his ship into a dreadnought so that a shipyard over Luna would still be standing the next morning. She let that sit on the open channel for exactly as long as it needed to. We remember every one of their names. We built a memorial wall with all of them carved into it, and every cadet who graduates from Earth Fleet Academy stands in front of that wall before they ever set foot on a ship. So you'll forgive me if I don't wait for a committee vote to decide whether the people who saved my planet are worth saving in return." Silence on the council channel. Whitfield didn't wait for a response. "Captain Holt. Bring the fleet in. Full formation, defensive envelope around every Ashvari vessel still flying. We are not here to ask permission. We're here to pay a debt." The battle for Ashvar Prime did not last 6 days. It lasted 6 hours. The Krythan Dominion fleet, which had planned for a straightforward final conquest of a weakened, isolated people, found itself instead facing a united Earth battle group flying formations no Krythan War College had ever catalogued, backed by weapons technology that had advanced a full century past what Earth carried during the Soul Line. Whitfield put the Ashvari survivors squarely behind her own hulls and told her captains, in plain language, exactly what she expected of them. "Nobody's ship burns today that doesn't have to. Not one more." By the 6th hour, the Krythan fleet was in full retreat, harried and broken across 3 jump points, and Ashvar Prime's smoke-choked sky held nothing but Earth ships and the handful of battered Ashvari vessels that had somehow, impossibly, survived to see it. On the surface, in a command bunker that had spent 6 hours believing rescue was a fantasy, Sela Corvath sat down for the first time in 2 days and put his head in his hands, and did not try to hide that he was shaking. When Admiral Whitfield's shuttle touched down at Ashvar Prime 3 days later, the crowd that met her was not large, the world had too few people left living on it for that, but it was silent in a way that carried further than any cheering could have. An old woman near the front of the gathering, leaning on a cane, watched the human admiral step onto Ashvari soil and said something quietly to the man beside her, who translated it into standard for the recording crews. She said, the translator relayed, that her mother told her once that a species with no history of kindness could still choose to have one. Admiral Grace Whitfield, daughter of Amarillo, Texas, granddaughter of a man who'd watched Doran Kesh's final flight from an orbital platform over the moon, looked out over the ruined, grateful, still standing world in front of her, and answered the only way that felt true. "We didn't forget you," she said. "We were never going to."